I had handled dangerous dogs for more than a decade, but the first time I saw Break inside the reinforced holding kennel at our station, I felt something I had never felt before. It was not fear. It was a sharp warning inside my chest that told me I was standing in front of an animal that had been pushed too far for too long. His body slammed against the steel panels so hard that the entire frame shook like someone was driving a truck into it. Every officer in the room kept their distance. Some leaned back against the far wall. Others crossed their arms and looked away, embarrassed by how unstable the dog looked. I heard someone say under their breath that this dog was a lawsuit waiting to happen. I should have walked out. I should have said no. Instead, I stepped closer because pride has a way of making you stupid, especially in a job where weakness is treated like a disease. I told myself that Break was just another challenge, another K9 that needed firm leadership. It felt good to believe that for the 5 seconds before everything spun out of control. The first time Break locked eyes with me, he hit the gate so violently that 2 officers jumped forward with their arms up. His teeth clashed against the bars and saliva sprayed across the concrete floor. His growl was so deep it felt like it came from the floor itself. Behind me, I heard a small voice say, "Dad, he is not angry. He is scared." My stomach tightened. I turned and saw my 8-year-old daughter, Rinley, standing barefoot on the training room doorway, still holding her cereal bowl because she must have rushed out of the break room the moment she heard the commotion. She looked small next to the chaos, like a kid standing too close to a burning building. She was calm, though, completely steady. Her eyes were locked on Break, not with fear, but with a strange, focused sympathy that she should not have understood at her age. I snapped at her. "Get back right now." She stepped back but kept her eyes on the dog. "He does not hate you," she said. "He is hurting." I wanted to shut her out of the room, but I could not ignore how Break had responded to her presence. His growling had changed. It was still low, still tense, but not violent. He was watching her, not the officers, not me. He pressed his body against the side of the kennel as if he were trying to get a better angle to see her. The lieutenant broke the moment by shouting, "Everybody away from the gate. If that thing gets loose, none of us are fast enough to stop it." The officers scattered and the room fell into a nervous silence. I stepped between the dog and my daughter, guiding her behind me, but I could still feel Break staring at her through the bars. I could not shake the feeling that she understood something about him that the rest of us had missed. It irritated me because it made no sense. She was a kid. This was a fully trained military dog with a history of aggression so severe that 3 handlers had already quit on him. Still, her words stuck. Scared, not angry. At that moment, though, I pushed that thought away because the responsible part of me knew that I had put my daughter in danger by letting her anywhere near that kennel. I grabbed her wrist and walked her out of the room. As I pulled her away, she whispered, "He will listen if you stop yelling." I did not want to admit that she had a point. The whole room had been filled with shouting, clattering metal, boots stomping, and people cursing. No calm, no patience, no chance of trust. When I returned to the training room, Break had started pacing in tight circles. Each step was stiff, the kind of stiff that comes from pain rather than aggression. I noticed it for the first time only because my daughter had pointed it out. His left hip dragged slightly each time he turned. Before I could study it longer, he jolted toward the bars again and slammed his shoulder into the panel so hard that it popped outward by a fraction of an inch. That was when one of the younger officers panicked and yelled, "If he gets out, I am shooting." The room went silent. Every pair of eyes turned to me. I was supposed to be the guy who made sure this kind of disaster never happened. I was supposed to be the steady one, the expert, the handler who built trust with dogs that other people avoided. Instead, I stood there with my heart pounding and my badge feeling heavier than it ever had. Break let out a sound that was not a bark or a growl. It was a low, wounded whine, not fear, not anger, pain. I heard my daughter's voice in my head again, calm and certain. "He is scared. He is hurting. He will listen if you stop yelling." I did not want to accept that she understood something I missed. I did not want to admit that a child saw through the chaos faster than trained adults. I certainly did not want to consider the possibility that she might be the key to reaching him, but I would be forced to face that truth soon enough. And the day she proved it, she put herself in the most dangerous situation I had ever witnessed. It changed everything. It changed my job, my family, and that dog's life. It also nearly cost my daughter hers. My life had always been split between two worlds. One was the controlled, disciplined environment of the K-9 unit where every command, every gesture, and every breath mattered. The other was my home, where I was trying to be a steady father to an 8-year-old girl who saw the world with a level of clarity I sometimes envied. Balancing both roles had never been easy, but I made it work through routine and stubborn determination. Most mornings began the same way. I packed lunches, checked homework, tied shoes, and made sure Rinley was ready before dropping her off at school. After that, I walked into a station where people expected me to handle animals that most officers would never approach. I had a reputation for patience and consistency, which made me proud, but it also meant the toughest cases always ended up on my desk. When our last K-9 retired early due to a spinal condition, the department scrambled to find a replacement. The pressure on me grew by the day. Calls were increasing, officers were stretched thin, and the chief wanted someone reliable, fast, and ready to deploy. That was when Brake entered the picture. The file landed on my desk with a heavy smack. Pages were filled with injury reports, failed handlers, and warnings from his previous unit. The military had classified him as extremely reactive, but still physically capable if someone could unlock his focus again. Every part of my better judgment told me this was not the dog we should take, yet pride made me think I could be the one to turn him around. I told the chief I would give it a try, even though the knot in my stomach said I was walking into something I did not fully understand. At home, the conversation about Brake became a nightly routine. My father, Colrin, who had served in the Marines, believed every dog could be controlled with enough confidence. He sat at the table with his arms crossed and said lines like, "A handler sets the tone. If the dog fails, the handler failed first." His voice carried more judgment than advice. My sister Tavira, who helped watch Rinley when I worked late, was softer but still honest. She told me the stress was wearing me down and that bringing such a volatile dog into my work life would only make things worse at home. She warned me that my daughter was absorbing every bit of tension even when I tried to hide it. Through all of this, Rinley listened quietly. She studied my face more than my words. One night she asked a question that caught me off guard. She said, "Do you know what scares him, or are you only looking at what he does wrong?" She was not being disrespectful. She was pointing out something I refused to see. I brushed her comments aside because it was easier to believe I had everything under control. I convinced myself this was just another challenge I would overcome. I did not realize that the real problem was not the dog, but my refusal to accept that I was approaching him the wrong way. I did not realize how much my daughter saw, or how much she would eventually risk to prove it. The first week with Brake stripped away every bit of confidence I walked in with. I had handled aggressive dogs before. I had worked with K-9s who had been abused, neglected, or pushed into fear-based reactions. None of them compared to him. His aggression did not come in flashes. It stayed in every breath he took. He paced his kennel like a soldier waiting for an attack. His ears stayed pinned back, his eyes stayed locked on anyone who entered the room, and his body remained coiled as if he expected a fight at any moment. Nothing I tried made a difference. Commands bounced off him like they were spoken into an empty stadium. Even basic cues meant nothing. When I tried to offer food through the feeding latch, he snapped at the metal and sent the bowl spinning across the concrete. When I approached with slow movements, he lunged anyway. When I tried stepping back to give him space, he slammed the gate harder. Every technique I trusted failed, and every hour spent with him chipped away at the sense of control I thought I had. The officers around me felt the pressure too. They watched me struggle and whispered to each other in tones they thought I could not hear. One told another that the department should cut their losses before someone ended up in the hospital. Another said keeping a dog like this was irresponsible. None of them said it to my face, but the message was clear. If I could not fix this, my reputation would take a hit. I needed the trust of my team to do my job. Brake was tearing that trust apart. The worst moment came on a Thursday afternoon during what was supposed to be a routine evaluation. I approached the kennel with 2 officers positioned behind me for backup. The moment I stepped close enough to examine Brake's posture, he hurled himself at the gate with such force that the hinges groaned. The entire panel flexed outward. One of the officers panicked and slammed his shoulder against it to push it back into place. Brake hit it again. His teeth snapped so close to my shirt sleeve that I felt the rush of air from his jaws. The officers looked at me with a mix of fear and accusation. One of them said, "If that thing breaks out, the chief will shut this whole program down." I did not respond. I felt the weight of their judgment pressing down on me like a physical force. I had spent years earning their trust, and in all of 10 minutes, one dog was destroying it. At home, the tension followed me like a shadow. I tried to keep it from showing, but my family noticed. I walked through the door each night carrying frustration like a second uniform. My sister asked if something was wrong, but I brushed her off with short answers. My father criticized without hesitation. He said, "You cannot let a dog control you." I wanted to yell back that it was not that simple, but I held my tongue because arguing would only make things worse. The only person who approached me with genuine curiosity was my daughter. She sat beside me on the couch one night and asked how training went. I gave her the same short, safe answer I always did. She studied me with that steady gaze she used whenever she knew I was hiding something. When I finally told her that the dog was not responding to anything, she said something that irritated me more than it should have. She said, "Maybe you are not hearing what he is trying to say." Her words felt like a small crack forming in a wall I had built. I ignored it. I told myself she was a kid who saw the world in simple shapes and feelings. I convinced myself that she did not understand how complicated this job was, but the truth was harder to accept. She had noticed something real, something I refused to look at because I was too busy trying to prove that I could fix everything alone. The pressure kept building until the department began pushing the idea of removing Brake permanently. The chief asked if the dog was a danger to us, and if I believed rehabilitation was realistic. Hearing that question out loud felt like an accusation. If I admitted defeat, I would be confirming every doubt people had whispered behind my back. That fear pushed me into denial. Instead of stepping back and reassessing, I doubled down on methods that were clearly not working. I let pride guide my decisions, and pride has a way of turning a difficult situation into a dangerous one. I did not know it yet, but the person who would crack this problem open would not be a trained officer or an experienced handler. It would be the one person I repeatedly dismissed, the one person who had been paying attention from the start. The pressure finally pushed me to change my approach. I realized that forcing authority onto a dog in that much distress was not training, it was intimidation. I had been so focused on controlling Brake that I never stopped to understand him. One morning before the station filled with noise, I walked into the training area alone and sat on a steel chair 10 feet from his kennel. I did not speak, gesture, or command. I just watched him. For the first 20 minutes he acted like he always did. He paced in tight circles, shoulders tight, tail stiff, eyes flicking toward the door as if he expected danger to walk through it. He paused only to growl at me, then resumed pacing. I kept watching. After a while his pattern shifted. His left hip hesitated, his back leg dragged. A tremor shot up his side every time he turned too quickly. My daughter had pointed that out, and the fact that she noticed before I did bothered me in a way I could not ignore. I spent 3 days observing him like that. No demands, no commands, no pressure. The goal was to understand what triggered him and what eased him. The station staff mocked it quietly. I heard one officer mutter that I had given up and was babysitting the dog instead of training him. I let the comments roll off because, for the first time since Brake arrived, I felt like I was actually learning something instead of fighting a losing battle. The turning point came unexpectedly and hit me with more fear than any lunge or growl ever had. I stepped out of the room to answer a radio call from dispatch. It took less than 30 seconds, but that was enough time for everything to slip out of my control. When I walked back in, my heart stopped. My daughter, Rinley, was sitting cross-legged on the concrete floor directly in front of Brake's kennel. She must have slipped in through the side door while I stepped out. She was close enough that if the latch failed by even an inch, the dog could reach her. Her hands were rested on her knees. She was not smiling or making baby talk. She was speaking in a soft, steady tone as if she were talking to a frightened child instead of an unpredictable military K-9. Brake was not snarling. He was not lunging at the bars. He was staring at her with a tense but focused expression. His ears were forward. His nose was twitching. His entire posture looked confused, like he was trying to understand something instead of reacting on instinct. I rushed forward and pulled her away with a grip tighter than I intended. Fear does that. It makes you grab first and think later. My voice came out sharp. You could have been mauled. What were you thinking? She did not cry. She looked straight at me and said, he listens when people stop yelling. He moves his left hip slow because it hurts. He is scared of fast hands. That is why he snaps. Her certainty hit harder than my anger. She was not guessing. She had been watching him longer than I realized, quietly piecing together what trained adults had ignored. Instead of brushing her off again, I forced myself to slow down and really hear her. Her observation about his hip replayed in my mind. I had seen it during my silent sessions, but she had recognized it before I did. I called the station vet immediately and requested a full exam with sedation. The vet confirmed what should have been obvious from the start. Brake had a deep tissue injury around his hip joint. Every abrupt movement sent pain through his side. Every attempt to discipline him with firm gestures or rapid corrections made that pain worse. He was not resisting training. He was defending himself. That truth was a hard punch to the gut. I had mishandled a dog who had trusted no one for months, and I had missed the one thing that could explain everything. My daughter, who had no training and no authority, had seen the truth because she paid attention without assumption. The vet recommended a recovery plan, pain management, reduced pressure, slow engagement. It was the opposite of the aggressive approach I had relied on. I made a decision that shifted the entire story. I committed to training Brake through patience and controlled interaction instead of dominance. It meant rebuilding his trust from the ground up and accepting that he was not a problem to be fixed, but a living being trying to survive pain. It also meant accepting that my daughter had given me the one insight that changed everything. I did not say it aloud that day, but I understood it clearly. She was the key I had been too stubborn to use, and I would soon discover just how far she was willing to go to prove she was right. The week after the vet confirmed Brake's injury, everything began to shift. His behavior changed slowly but noticeably. When I approached his kennel with quieter movements and kept my hands low, his growls softened. When I tossed his food bowl gently instead of sliding it with force, he stepped toward it without snapping. It was progress, but it felt fragile, like a thin bridge stretching over a collapsing cliff. One wrong move could shatter it. To build trust, I started letting him roam inside the fenced training yard for short periods. He stayed tense, but he no longer exploded at every sound. Sometimes he paused and glanced toward the doorway, waiting for someone he could not fully trust but was willing to watch. My daughter noticed this on a Saturday afternoon when she visited after school. She said, "He is checking if you are there before he moves." I did not admit it out loud, but she was right. The breakthrough came during a quiet Sunday morning when the station was almost empty. I brought Brake into the yard again, keeping distance and letting him move at his own pace. I watched his posture. His body stayed tight, but his head turned toward me with curiosity instead of hostility. We were making progress, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened that afternoon. I heard screaming in the neighborhood behind the station. It was sharp and panicked, the kind of scream that cuts through every other sound. I moved without thinking and ran toward the back fence. As I got closer, I saw Myra, my neighbor from 2 houses down, stumbling into the alley behind the station. Her shirt was torn and blood ran down her arm. She gasped for air and collapsed against the fence, trembling so violently her whole body shook. She managed to say, "He is still here," before her voice broke. Her ex-boyfriend had been stalking her for months, and I had advised her to file reports. She did. They were ignored. Now he had broken into her house and chased her out while she tried to escape. Before I could climb the fence or radio for backup, I heard a gate latch snap behind me. I turned just as Brake slipped out of the training yard where the lock had not caught correctly. My stomach dropped. He was loose, powerful, unpredictable, and only halfway through bonding with me. He saw Myra before he saw me. His ears shot forward, his muscles tensed. I stepped into his line of sight and shouted, "Break, stay." He did not listen. He sprinted straight toward her. I ran after him, expecting the worst. I reached for my belt, terrified that I might have to use force on the dog I had been fighting so hard to rehabilitate. But what happened next stopped me cold. Instead of attacking Myra, Brake skidded to a halt in front of her and planted his paws firmly on the ground. He stood between her and the alley entrance like a shield. His growl was low and controlled, directed at the corner of the alley where the intruder was emerging again. Myra grabbed the back of Brake's neck and whispered, "Please do not leave me." He stayed still, his body locked in a protective stance. Then I heard my daughter's voice behind me. She had followed me out without my noticing. She walked toward Brake with steady steps and said, "Brake, stay with her. She needs you. You protect her." He did not move from his position, but he responded to her voice. His breathing steadied. His tail lowered. He shifted just enough to show he was listening to her. The intruder stepped into view again, holding a metal pipe and shouting incoherent threats. Brake growled once, loud and deep, then braced his body. He did not lunge. He did not snap. He held the line. His restraint gave me the seconds I needed. I closed the distance and tackled the intruder to the ground, disarming him and cuffing him with the help of 2 officers who arrived in response to Myra's screams. When I looked back, Myra was crying into Brake's fur. My daughter was kneeling beside him with her hand on his shoulder. The chaos had forced the truth into the open. The dog we believed was uncontrollable had made the right choice when it mattered most. He had not been an enemy. He had been waiting for someone to understand him. And in that moment, he chose exactly who he wanted to be. The aftermath of that day was unlike anything I had expected. The station was buzzing, but it was not just the usual chatter about arrests and patrols. It was about Brake. Every officer who had doubted me or whispered behind my back now looked at the dog with a mixture of respect and disbelief. He had made the choice we had all failed to imagine. He had controlled his aggression, protected a civilian, and obeyed a child when trained adults could not reach him. I walked into the station the next morning with Rinley at my side. She held his leash gently, and he walked calmly beside her. The other handlers stopped their tasks to watch us. Colrin, my father, stepped forward and shook his head with an almost grudging smile. "Looks like the kid saw what trained adults missed," he said. He did not offer praise lightly, and this felt like the closest thing I had ever received from him to approval. The chief called me into his office later that day. He placed Brake's rehabilitation file on the desk and said, "You and this dog have done something remarkable. He is part of the K9 unit now, officially. No questions." I nodded, but my mind was not on the promotion or recognition. It was on the quiet presence of my daughter who had been the catalyst. She had noticed pain where I saw aggression. She had spoken the truth when I could not. She had risked herself to prove it. Myra, the woman Brake protected, recovered quickly with medical care and emotional support. A week later, she came by our house with a bouquet of flowers for Rinley. She hugged her tightly and said, "You saved me by trusting him when no one else did. Thank you for noticing what others ignored." Rinley's small frame shivered as she smiled, and I realized my daughter had just experienced a moment of empowerment she would carry her entire life. At home, things began to shift. Brake's presence became a bridge instead of a threat. He followed commands calmly, lay at Rinley's feet during homework, and greeted our family without tension. The dynamic that had once been filled with stress and fear became predictable in a way that was comforting. Rinley developed a bond with Brake that transcended age or experience. They understood each other intuitively. She could calm him with a whisper, a soft gesture, or a gentle step toward him. I could only watch and learn. The lessons went deeper than dog training. I realized that true strength was not forcing compliance but noticing what others dismiss. Brake's aggression had not been a flaw to overcome. It was a signal, a communication that he had been ignored for too long and was in pain. My daughter's observation had opened my eyes to that truth. She had taught me that patience, attention, and empathy could reach what brute force could not. Colrin eventually admitted he had underestimated Rinley's insight. "I never thought a child could teach me something about a dog I thought I knew," he said one evening. Tavira smiled quietly, saying nothing, but her eyes told me she recognized the same truth I had. My daughter had rewritten the rules for all of us. The experience changed our family. We became more aware of the subtle signs in each other, the unspoken tensions and small gestures that often go unnoticed. Rinley learned the power of observation and courage. Brake learned that he could trust humans without fear, and I learned that authority without listening is meaningless. The final scene unfolded one evening when I returned home from work. Rinley was in the living room, Brake lying at her feet. She had her hand resting lightly on his neck, and he leaned into her touch. They looked at each other without words. I watched them, my chest tight with emotion. The dog that everyone had labeled untamable had found peace, and it was all because a child had dared to see him differently. That moment became the story I would carry for the rest of my life. Bravery is not about strength. It is about noticing what others overlook, trusting your instincts, and protecting those who cannot protect themselves. In the end, the lesson was clear. Control is not earned through force. Respect is earned through understanding. Compassion is stronger than dominance. And sometimes the smallest voice in the room can speak the loudest truth, changing everything.